creature indicates to me that we're at a level of novelty that this planet has never before experienced. Of course, it's an arguable thing because history, which is what we're always comparing these waves to, is not yet a quantified thing. I mean, how do you rate the War of the Roses over Queen Anne's War or something like that? But nevertheless, though we don't have an absolute quantification of history, there is general agreement among historians that events like the Renaissance, the Greek Golden Age, the 20th century are periods where a great deal of novelty in social forms and technologies was concentrated. By my understanding of this theory, there can be no misses. In other words, it's not a statistical theory. We're not okay if we're right two-thirds of the time.
Hear, hear.
So we have to be right all the time.
So you're telling me you are?
I submit to you and to the world for your examination and critiquing the fact that, yes, the time wave with its end point in December 21st, 2012, describes with as great an accuracy as I am able to discern the actual vicissitudes of novelty and habit in history and natural history. That's the claim. That's right. But now notice that what the time wave theory is saying is that every moment in time is a unique moment.
Is unique and will not specifically repeat, but what you're suggesting is that you can plot the highs of novelty throughout history.
You know, the way science works now is if you want to know how much energy is flowing through a wire, you take 1,000 measurements, you add them together, and you divide by 1,000, and then you have the current flowing through the wire. But notice that that assumes that it doesn't matter what time you make the measurement, and that leaves out then history, love affairs, corporate takeovers, empire building. Everything interesting in the human world is too fragile, too finely embedded in the context of its time to be open to that kind of scientific modeling.
They're really relatively small, insignificant events that don't enter into the larger measurements you're making of this ebb and flow.
Well, for instance, on a given day when the chart says novelty will be high, certainly somewhere in the world someone is having a very unnovel day. It's a statistical thing, a bell curve, no reference to you, Art,
sure.
But a bell curve where when the wave is predicting high novelty, most people, most systems will experience that novelty, but of course some will not. The idea that time can be described as a perfectly smooth surface and then dealt with statistically is just a first pass with Greek idealism, and careful examination of nature shows it to be inadequate in the same way that perfect circles were inadequate for describing planetary motion.
You are therefore saying that conventional science does not have and cannot have, with its present course of investigation, and a proper understanding of time.
That's right, because it assumes that it is to be analyzed with statistics, and that flattens out and denies the difference among various times and types of time.